feel about people that say, bad poetry versus good poetry? I always hear people judge bad poetry over good poetry. Is it really bad? Is it really bad poetry? Is it according to taste, or do you consider bad poetry of someone that's not um, have rhythm in their poems, or they're not being creative enough? Because I have my definition of bad poetry, and somebody else may consider that good poetry. But what are your?
That's a great. I think there was a time where I really did believe in that concept of bad poetry and good poetry, and I think part of the reason was this was a time when I still believed that craft was the thing that's going to separate you. And what I've learned, and this is, if you've seen our other videos, I've talked about this before, is that I was attending a retreat, working with, it was Callaloo. I was working with Ivy Francis, and she pulled me aside, and she's like, Geoff, you have the best craft in the cohort, but that doesn't mean you write the best poems. And that really stuck with me, and something that I've learned a lot since then is the power of presentation. I think a lot of times, especially, I think you see this a lot, especially with like page poets, is you see people really honing in on the craft, like really getting the devices and everything. It's like so fine-tuned, and yet they have no presentation skills whatsoever. And I think what we find is that craft is important. Craft is the prerequisite, but at a certain point, you're not going to be able to achieve mass readership or the readership that you may desire just purely off of craft. Because craft on its own isn't necessarily remarkable. Going back to that. So we have to find ways that reach people. We have to develop those kind of marketing skills, in all honesty. And a lot of poets don't like that. Because poets hear business and they cringe. And they think it's like sacrificing the art. I get it. But there's ways that you can make it work together. All this to say, going back to the question, good poetry versus bad poetry, I think it all comes down to audience and who are you trying to reach. So for instance, let's use the Rupi Kaur example. I personally wouldn't buy a book of Rupi Kaur's poetry. It doesn't speak to me. I'm not her audience. Her audience is the audience she's built on Instagram, and things like that. So who am I to say that my poetry is better than hers? She's filling auditoriums. I can't do that. So I think it's all about who are you writing for, and how successfully are your poems being received by the audience. I think that's probably the greater determiner of quality, because in a lot of ways, you don't determine the quality of your own work.
That's true. Well, it depends on the reason why I say because if you're writing for yourself and you decided to read it to the audience, to yourself, it's quality. Because you know what, in quality in the instance of you wrote a poem that helped you get out of something. You wrote a poem that every time you read it, it inspires you and motivates you. But so to you it's quality, but someone else like, you could have rearranged this way, rearranged that way. That's quality in their eyes, and in your eyes, it's quality.
I don't disagree. I think a lot of times when poets say they're their own audience, I think they're not being honest.
Oh yeah,
we were actually we were talking about this a minute ago. So right now we're in the middle of we're hosting our retreat. This is our 4th retreat this year. Thank you. Yeah, really exciting. We have a great group, and this is a topic that came up a bit today. Is again this topic of audience, because if you say this poem is for me, and you read that poem out loud, and it gets no snaps, it gets no rewinds, it gets no claps, it gets no people shouting back at you, and you get upset, there's a disconnect.
That's true. Because
you say this poem's just for you, but you're not getting the response from the audience that you say isn't important, because the poem's for you. But apparently it's not just for you, because you're responding negatively to it. So we have to. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves, and it's okay if the poem's not just for you.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have to ask ourselves, who is the poem for, and are we okay it's for them, and how are we making sure that the poem is for them?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say this, a lot of times when you make that poem for yourself, it's for yourself. Now, you can choose. If you're going to read it for the audience, you may say, you know what, let me change a couple of lines just for this order. I'm just going to change one line, you know. Like, I'm just going to give you an example on the spot. Let's say, for instance, you have this poem called, you know, let's say the original title of the poem was, you don't have to feel sad if you're broke. I was sad and broke. You don't have to feel sad. But then you can come out, that could be for you. But then let's say for the audience, you may want to start off with, you don't got to be a bust down if you're broke down. Because, you know, people are like, bust down. She talking about bust down. Who busting down? You're broke. So, you know, you getting their attention. Now it's for the audience. Like, ooh, let me listen now. So it's kind of like, it's the same poem, but we got to just change that, just that first line, just to wake them up or whatever. So I think you got that's if you're trying to get the claps or whatever, you know.
I think it's really important that you mentioned first line. I think it's valid for so many aspects. Like, I was going to relate it to poetry, but it extends beyond that. It's really, you know, the more I have like a teaching business online, like English pronunciation teaching, but the more, it's just funny how the world works, because the more you learn about one field, the more you see it applies to all the other fields. Mm-hmm. Everything's so connected. Mm-hmm. In a poem, your first impression comes from your title and your first line.
Absolutely. That's how
whether it's on the page,
mm-hmm.
whether it's a spoken word,
mm-hmm.
you know, whether you're on the stage. But this is also true for any interaction you have with a person. Mm-hmm. The most valuable moment you have is that very first time you meet someone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think it's important to take a moment to kind of prepare yourself for, like, the next time I meet someone, how do I want to introduce myself? Mm-hmm. Because you can't ever replace that. And words are powerful. We don't have words to waste. You know, everything's really important. We only get one interaction in that moment.